The night the fever took its dark turn, I was the newest guard on the wall, and I was the only one awake to see the little light in the west window go out for the first time in 140 nights. I had counted them. That is the thing no one knew about me yet, the thing I had told no one at Harrowgate that I counted. I counted paces on the forecourt, 712 from the north gate to the chestnut tree and back. I counted the strokes of the great clock. And I counted, every night I stood the courtyard post, the nights that the small warm light had answered mine from the high west window, because it was the one thing in my rigid new life that felt less like a duty and more like a friendship. And a guard who is 19 years old and 1,000 miles from anyone who loves her will hold on to a thing like that with both hands. My name is Wren Callowmere. I came to the watch of the Royal House of Harrowgate the autumn I turned 19, the first woman of my family ever to wear the red, and I nearly did not last the first month. I could stand still. I had always been able to stand still. It is a talent like any other, and mine came cheap. What I could not do was stand still and not weep from the loneliness of it. Those first weeks, on the long empty courtyard post from midnight to the gray hour, when the whole vast pale house of gray stone and gilded iron slept, and I was a single small figure of discipline in an ocean of dark, holding a rifle I was not sure I deserved to hold, guarding a family that did not know my name. It was the child who taught me my name mattered. It was the child who gave me the light. Let me tell it in order, because the gravity of what I have to tell you deserves order, and because I have learned since that the meaning of a thing is in its order, in the patient stacking of small nights into something that turns out at the end to have been enormous. Harrowgate Palace sits above the river bend in the Kingdom of Eldermoor, and its inner courtyard, the Chestnut Court, they call it, for the single ancient chestnut tree that has stood in its center since before the present house was raised, is the loneliest post in the palace and the one they give the newest guard, because nothing ever happens there. The royal family's private apartments look down into the Chestnut Court on the west side, high leaded windows behind which the queen and her consort and their 2 children sleep. On the east side runs the guard's walk, a stone gallery where one of us paces the night. Between us, the tree. It was October when I came, and the chestnut was dropping its leaves in slow gold spirals across the cobbles, and I paced the walk and looked up at the dark windows and felt as small as a person can feel. Then one night in my second week, past midnight, a light appeared in the highest west window, just a small warm light, a candle or a little lamp held close to the glass, and a shape behind it small. I could tell even at that distance that it was a small shape lifting the light up, and then lowering it and then lifting it again. 3 times, slow, deliberate, a signal. I did not know what to do. There is no order in the watch of Harrowgate that covers a light in a window signaling to the guard. So I did the only thing my frightened, lonely, 19-year-old heart could think to do. I lifted my own lantern. We carry a shuttered lantern on the deep night courtyard post to check the doors, and I raised it up and lowered it and raised it. 3 times, slow, an answer. And the small shape in the window, I swear to you, jumped. Jumped for joy. I saw the light bob and dance, and then steadied, and lifted the light once more, held it high, held it there, a long moment, the way you hold a hand up in farewell until the person is out of sight. And then it went away from the window, and the window was dark, and I stood in the Chestnut Court with my heart going like a drum, less alone than I had been in 2 weeks, and I did not yet know that I had just made the most important friend of my life. It was the Princess Malin, of course. She was 8 years old that autumn, a small, watchful, particular child I would come to learn, the kind who lies awake when the house sleeps and notices what no one else notices. And what she had noticed from her high window was me, the new guard, the one who paced the Chestnut Court alone every night and never had anyone to signal to. She had watched me, she told me much later, for a week, and decided I looked lonely, and resolved in the grave, absolute way she resolved everything, to do something about it. So she had waited up, and lit her little lamp, and signaled to the guard, because a child who is often kept indoors and awake in the dark understands loneliness the way few grown people do, and she had recognized it in the small red figure below her window, and she had answered it. That was the beginning of the light. It became, over that autumn and the winter that followed, our whole silent language. 3 lifts of the lamp, I am here. A slow raise and hold, good night. A quick trembling flutter some nights when I later learned she'd had a bad dream or a hard day. I am here, are you there? And I would answer, steady and sure, 3 slow lifts, I am here, sleep now. We never spoke a word across that dark court. We did not need to. We had built, the lonely guard and the wakeful child, a bridge of light across the chestnut court, and every night that light crossed it, and I counted the nights. And by the night the fever came I had counted 140 of them, and I could no more have imagined that court dark than I could have imagined the chestnut tree gone from its center. I should tell you plainly, because it matters for everything after, that I never once presumed on it. I never sought the child out by day, never spoke of the light to a soul, never let the great officers of the watch suspect that the newest and least of their guards had a secret standing appointment with a princess of the realm. It would have been stopped instantly, and rightly, there are protocols, and a guard does not form private attachments to the family, and had it come to Captain Marrow's ears in the wrong way I'd have been off the courtyard post and possibly out of the red altogether. So I kept it. It was mine and hers, the one warm secret in a cold and disciplined house, and I guarded it the way I guarded everything, in silence, with my whole heart. I did meet her once by day, that winter, and I will tell you of it because it is the seed of the whole thing. It was a bright, hard morning after a snow, and I was crossing the forecourt off duty when a small figure came pelting across the cobbles, muffled to the eyes, and stopped dead in front of me and looked up, and I looked down, and we knew each other instantly, though we had never been within 50 feet in the light. She did not say hello. She said with enormous seriousness, "You're the courtyard guard, the one with the light." And I said, "I am, your highness." And she nodded slowly, taking me in. The girl behind the light at last made real, and then she said the thing I have carried ever since. She said, "I always know you're there, even when I can't see the light, because you promised." 3 times means you promised. And then she ran off across the snow, and I stood there in the cold with my eyes stinging, having just learned that a child had taken my nightly lantern for a promise, and had built her nights around it, and trusted me, completely. I did not treat it lightly after that. A promise is a heavier thing than a friendship, and from that morning I stood the courtyard post as though the whole realm depended on the light crossing the court on time. If I was rostered elsewhere, I found ways, traded watches, called in the small favors a new guard can call in, did double turns to earn them, so that as many nights as I could contrive it, it was Wren Callowmere in the chestnut court at midnight, lifting the lantern 3 times, keeping the promise. I told myself it was harmless, that the light was the one thing I did in that great cold house that was purely and simply good, and that a thing which helps a frightened child sleep cannot be wrong however far outside the orders it falls. I believe that still, but I know now that I was also keeping it for myself, because that light coming back across the dark court was the thing that kept me in the red those first hard months, and I have never been ashamed of needing it. So 140 nights, and on the 141st the light did not come. The spring had come in wet and cold, the kind that gets into the old palace's bones, and I had heard, everyone had heard, in the way news travels a great house without anyone announcing it, that the little princess had taken a chill. Children take chills. I was not alarmed. That first night the window stayed dark. I stood my post and lifted my lantern 3 times into the black glass, "I am here," and got no answer, and I told myself she was sleeping off a cold with a nurse at her side and had no business sitting up in cold windows, and that the best thing I could do for her was keep the promise anyway, in case she woke, in case she looked. So I did. I lifted it 3 times slow, and held it high a long moment, good night, and I stood the rest of the watch, and the window never lit, and I went off at the gray hour heavier than I could account for. The second night the window stayed dark too, and this time there were lights burning late behind the other west windows, the ones that do not usually burn, and I saw figures pass behind them, more figures than a chill warrants, and once I saw the tall stooped shape of a man I did not know carrying a bag, going in at the hour when honest visitors do not come, and the cold that went through me then had nothing to do with the spring. I lifted my lantern 3 times into the dark high window all the same. "I am here," nothing answered. But I stood, and I kept the promise, because a promise that is only kept when it is answered is not a promise at all, and I had told a child that 3 times means you promised, and I would not have that be a lie, whatever was happening behind the glass. The third night was the night it took its dark turn, and the third night I was the only one in the chestnut court, and so I am the one who has to tell it. It had rained all day, and the rain had stopped near midnight, leaving the cobbles black and shining, and the whole court smelling of wet stone and the first green of the chestnut, which had begun, that week, to unfurl its new leaves. The tree coming back to life over a court where, though I did not yet know the words for it, a small life 2 floors up was guttering like a candle in a draught. I took the post at midnight from a yawning corporal who told me nothing, because he knew nothing. The trouble was still sealed inside the family's apartments and had not yet spread its chill through the ranks. I began my pacing, 712 to the tree and back. And I watched the high west window, and I waited for the light, the way I had waited 140 nights, and it did not come, and it did not come, and the great clock struck 1, and it did not come. And then, a little after 1, the window lit. I cannot tell you what went through me. Relief first, a great flood of it. She is better, she has woken, she has come to the window. I had my lantern up before I had thought about it. 3 quick lifts. I am here, so glad you're there. And the light in the window answered, but wrongly. It did not lift 3 times. It lifted once high and wavered there, and I understood in an instant that it was not being held by small steady hands. It was too high. It was held at a grown person's height. It wavered because whoever held it was not signaling. They were simply standing at the window with a lamp, looking out, and the lamp had strayed into the glass. And then, as I stood frozen with my own lantern half raised, the figure at the window seemed to realize what it had done, that it had put a light in the window, that the child put a light in, and it snatched the lamp back, and the window went dark, hard, all at once, the way a light goes out when a hand is clapped over it. And that dark was the worst thing I have ever seen. I have stood posts since that have shown me hard things, and none of them was as hard as that window going black at the wrong time, in the wrong way, by the wrong hand, because I understood it. I understood it completely, standing alone in the wet court with my useless lantern in my hand. The child was not at the window. The child could not come to the window. Someone had been standing over her in the dark with a lamp. A nurse, a doctor, her mother, I did not know. And the trouble in that room had grown so great that a grown person had come to the black window in the dead of night simply to breathe, to look out at something that was not the sickbed, and had by accident lit the signal that belonged to a child, and had recoiled from it as from a wound. I lowered my lantern. I did not lift it 3 times. I could not, in that moment, keep a promise to a window that had just told me, in the plainest language there is, that the one who taught me the promise was too ill to receive it. I stood in the chestnut court under the reviving tree, and I felt the loneliness I had felt my first weeks come flooding back tenfold, and worse, because now it was not my loneliness that undid me but hers. The thought of that small, watchful, particular child lying somewhere behind that black glass, too weak to lift a lamp, perhaps too weak now even to look, and the light she had built her nights around gone dark on the very nights she might need it most. I want to tell you that in that moment a great resolve rose up in me. It did not. In that moment I only stood and grieved, and did not know what a guard could possibly do against a thing like a fever behind a black window. But something had been set going in me that would not stop going, and it was this, the promise. 3 times means you promised. I had made a promise to a child, and the child was in the dark, and a promise is not undone by the fact that it has grown hard to keep. If anything, a promise is only worth the name on exactly the night it grows hard to keep. And so, before the great clock struck 2, cold and certain and entirely against every standing order of the watch, I had decided that I was going to keep it. I did not yet know how, but I was going to get the light back to her. Whatever it took, and whatever it cost me, the child was not going to lie in the dark believing the guard had stopped promising, not while I wore the red. The trouble was, I was the least person in the palace to do anything about it. I was 19. I was the newest guard in the watch, with barely a season in the red, no rank, no standing, no right whatsoever to so much as speak to the family, let alone to insert myself into the gravest and most private grief a royal house can suffer. A guard in my position does not have ideas. A guard in my position stands where she is put and keeps her mouth shut and is grateful to be allowed to do it. If I went to anyone with what I knew, that I had a secret nightly signal with the sick princess, that I had been lifting a lantern to her window for 140 nights, the most likely result was that I would be quietly removed from the courtyard post, spoken to sternly about attachments and protocols, and perhaps let go, and then there would be no light at all, ever, and the child would be worse off than before. The knowledge sat on me like a stone all the rest of that watch. I had a promise to keep, and no possible way to keep it, that did not risk destroying the very thing I meant to protect. So I went, at the gray hour when my watch ended, to the one person in the palace I thought might understand, and I will tell you, going to him was the bravest thing I had done in my life to that point, braver than taking the oath, because taking the oath only risked my body, and this risked the one warm thing I had. Captain Marrow commanded the watch of Harrowgate. He was an old man, older than the sergeants, older than the walls seemed sometimes, a lean gray figure who had stood every post in the palace in his 40 years and now stood above them all, and who was known throughout the ranks for 2 things, that he missed nothing, and that he had never once in living memory bent a regulation. The young guards were terrified of him. I was terrified of him. But I had watched him in my few months, and I had seen a thing the others had not troubled to see, which was that Captain Marrow's rigidity was not coldness. It was the opposite. It was a man so full of care for the house and its people that he had built a wall of iron discipline to hold it all in, because if he had let it show, he would have drowned in it. I had seen him once at the changing of the guard, watch the 2 royal children go by on their way to their lessons, and I had seen his stone face do a small thing it did not mean to do, a softening at the corners of the eyes, quickly mastered. I gambled everything on that softening. I found him in the guardroom before the dawn muster, alone, drinking the black tea he drank, going over the rosters. I stood at attention in the doorway until he looked up. When he did, his gray eyes went over me the way they went over everything, cataloging, and he said, "Callowmere, you're off the courtyard watch. Why are you not asleep?" "Sir," I said, "I need to report something. It is irregular. It may cost me my post. I am reporting it anyway because I believe the alternative is worse." That got his full attention. An old captain knows the difference between a guard making excuses and a guard falling on her own sword, and he set down his tea and folded his hands and said, "Report." And I told him all of it. The light in the window my second week, the answer I had given, the language of lifts we had built, the 140 nights, the promise, the child running to me in the snow, 3 times means you promised. And then the last 3 nights, the dark window, the wrong hand at the glass, the black that had fallen when a grown person recoiled from a signal meant for a child. I told it plainly, the way I had learned to render a report, and I did not soften my own part in it or pretend it had been within any order, and when I had finished, I stood and waited for the axe. Captain Marrow did not speak for a long time. He looked at me, and then he looked at the window where the gray dawn was coming up, and then, to my astonishment, he stood and went to the window and stood with his back to me, and when he spoke his voice was not the parade ground voice at all. It was low and old, and it had something in it I had not expected, which was grief. "You will not lose your post," he said. "Sit down, Callowmere." I did not sit. A guard does not sit before her captain, and he heard me not sit and almost smiled, I think, at the window. "Stand then, stubborn. Good, you'll need to be." He was quiet another moment. Then he said, "I am going to tell you a thing that has not gone below the officers, and you will hold it as you have held your light in silence on your honor. Do you understand me?" "On my honor, sir." "The princess is very ill," he said. "It is not a chill. It has been 3 weeks coming and 2 nights since it turned, and it turned hard. The physicians—" He stopped and started again, an old man choosing his words with terrible care. "The physicians have done what physicians do. There is a man come from the city, the best in the realm, and he has done what the best in the realm can do. And last night, Callowmere, they came to the queen and told her that they had reached the end of what medicine can add. That the child is very grave. That what remains now is rest and calm, and the child's own strength and time, and that the greatest enemy they have left to fight is not the fever itself but the child's fear of it. A frightened child spends her strength on the fear and has none left for the fight. They need her calm. They need her not afraid. And she is afraid, Callowmere. She is 8 years old and she is burning and she is frightened. And there is a thing she keeps asking for that no one in that room understands, and it has been half breaking the queen's heart because she cannot give it." The cold came up through my boots. I think I knew before he said it. "What does she ask for, sir?" Captain Marrow turned from the window and looked at me, and his old eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it, and he said, "The light. She asks for the guard's light. She surfaces out of the fever and she asks whether the guard is there, whether the light is coming, and no one knows what she means. And they tell her yes, yes, of course, to soothe her. And she knows they are lying. She is a sharp child even burning up. And she knows they don't know what she's asking, and it frightens her more, because the one fixed thing in her nights, the one thing she was sure of, the thing she called a promise, has gone dark, and no one in her whole grieving family so much as knows it exists." He took a breath. "And then you walk into my guardroom at dawn and tell me you're the light. Do you see now, Callowmere, why you will not be losing your post?" I could not speak. He crossed the room and stood in front of me, this iron old man, and he put a hand on my shoulder, which he had never done to any guard I knew of, and he said, "You kept a promise to a lonely child for 140 nights, and asked nothing for it, and told no one. That is the whole of what this uniform means, girl, and most who wear it their whole lives never once do it as purely as you have done it by accident. So now we are going to do it on purpose. You and I are going to get that light back to her. And God help any regulation that stands in the way, because I have kept the regulations of this house for 40 years, and I have just discovered the one thing worth breaking them for." It was not, it turned out, as simple as walking back to the court and lifting a lantern. The first problem was the one that had darkened the window in the first place. The child could no longer come to the glass. She could barely lift her head. Even if I stood in the court every night and lifted my light 1,000 times, she could not cross the room to see it, and a light that cannot be seen is no comfort at all. The whole language we had built assumed 2 well people at 2 windows, and one of us was now too ill to hold up her end. So it was not enough to send the light. Somehow the light had to be brought to her bedside, to where she lay, and that meant that the secret between a guard and a child, which had lived its whole life across the safe distance of a dark courtyard, had to come indoors into the sick room, into the most guarded and private space in the palace, past the physicians and the nurses and the grieving queen. It had to become known. There was no keeping it secret and keeping it too. And I understood, walking beside Captain Marrow up through the waking palace that gray morning, that I was about to lose the privateness of the one thing that had sustained me, and I found I did not care in the slightest. Let it be known. Let the whole realm know. Only let it reach her. Captain Marrow did the thing that had to be done first, which was the thing only an officer could do. He went to the queen. Not to bother her with a guard's sentiment, he was too wise for that, but to bring her, in the worst hour of her life, a single actionable thing, which is the greatest gift you can bring the helpless. I was not in the room. I stood in the gallery outside at attention in the full weight of the red, and I waited, and I have never waited so hard at any post. I could hear faintly the sounds of a sick room, low voices, the small terrible sounds of care, and once I heard, thin and high and frightened and breaking my heart clean in two, the voice of the child, fretful, asking something, and a woman's voice soothing. And I stood at attention in the gallery and let the tears run down my face without moving a muscle, because I could not go in and I could not help, and all I could do was be there, straight and still, one fixed red point in a house of fear, on the chance that some scrap of the steadiness got through the wall to her. Then the door opened, and Captain Marrow came out, and behind him came the Queen. I had never been within 20 feet of Queen Saralind. She was, in the ordinary way of the house, as far above a courtyard guard as the chestnut's highest branch is above its roots. I had seen her at reviews, radiant and remote in the blaze of state, the good queen the whole realm loved, who was said to remember the names of her servants' children. I had never imagined seeing her as I saw her then, in a plain dark robe, her hair down, her face stripped of every kingdom she carried, a mother who had been 3 nights without sleep at the side of a burning child, her eyes red and enormous in a white face. She came out of the room and she looked at me, the guard, the courtyard guard, the one with the light, and I came to attention so sharp I heard my own boots ring, and I did not trust myself to breathe. She crossed the gallery to me. And the Queen of Eldermoor, in the worst hour of her life, looked into the face of the least of her guards, and she said, in a voice worn to a thread but perfectly steady, "You are the light." "Yes, Your Majesty," I said. "I am so sorry, Your Majesty, I never meant." "Don't," she lifted a hand, the smallest gesture, and it stopped me completely. "Don't you dare apologize. Captain Marrow has told me. For 140 nights you have been keeping my daughter company across a dark courtyard, and I did not know, and her physicians did not know, and I have spent 2 nights watching her break her heart, asking for a thing none of us could give her because none of us knew it existed." Her voice did the smallest thing, a hairline crack, instantly mastered. I would come to know that sound, the sound of the strongest people holding on. "She has been asking for you. Do you understand? Out of the fever, when she can barely say her own name, she asks whether the guard is there and whether the light is coming. And I have been lying to her, saying yes, and she has known I didn't understand, and it has frightened her worse." The Queen took a breath. "So I am going to ask you to do something no guard of this house has ever been asked to do, and you may refuse it, and no one will think the less of you. I am going to ask you to come into my daughter's sick room and bring your light, and let her see that the guard is there and the promise is kept. Will you do that? Will you come in?" I had thought I understood, that dawn, what I had set going. I had not. I had thought to send a light across a court. Instead, the Queen of Eldermoor was inviting a 19-year-old courtyard guard into the sealed heart of the house, into her child's sick room, because that guard held the one key left to a door the physicians could not open. "Your Majesty," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to, because the red does that for you, it holds you up when the person inside would fall. It would be the honor of my life. They let me change nothing about how I looked. That was the Queen's own instinct, and it was exactly right, and I have marveled at it since, that a mother 3 nights without sleep could think so clearly about what a frightened child needs. "She must see the guard," the Queen said. "Not a girl in a nightdress being kind. The guard, exactly the guard, the one from the court. Come as you are." So I came as I was, in the full red of the watch, bearskin and gloves and medals and rifle left at the door, because you do not carry a rifle into a sick room, but everything else exactly as she knew me. And I carried, instead of the rifle, the shuttered lantern from the courtyard post. The very one, I made sure of it, the same lantern whose light had crossed the court 140 times. The nurse met me at the inner door. Her name was Bess, a broad, steady countrywoman who had nursed the child since infancy and loved her past all telling, and she had wept herself past weeping, and had that flat calm the exhausted reach at the bottom of grief. She looked at me, the guard come to the sick room, and I braced for her to send me away. A nurse guards her sick room fiercer than any soldier a gate. But she only looked at the lantern in my hand, and then at my face, and something moved in her worn features, and she said, "Lo, so it's you. It's a guard she's been asking for. Well." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'll tell you plain, guardswoman, I don't understand the half of what's happening in this house tonight. But that child in there has been reaching for something the whole world can't give her. And if you're it, then you come in and you be it. And I'll not have a word said against it by physician or protocol or the Queen herself." She stood aside. And then she caught my sleeve, the way you catch someone before a hard thing, and she said, "Be steady, whatever you see. She frightens easy just now, and she's watching for the smallest thing to be wrong. So be the guard. Be that thing that's always the same. Can you do that?" "That," I said, "is the one thing I know how to do." And Bess, the nurse, looked at me a moment longer, and nodded, and let me into the room where the Princess Malin lay very ill, and I carried the courtyard light into her, and I will tell you what happened there as gently as it deserves to be told. The room was dim and warm and very quiet, and it smelled of the things sick rooms smell of. And there were people in it, the Queen, and a tall, grave, stooped man I took for the great physician, and another younger one, and Bess behind me, but I did not really see them, because in the bed by the tall, dark window there was a small shape under the covers, so small, smaller than I had let myself imagine, and I understood in one blow to the heart how ill she was. This was not the child who had pelted across the snow. Her face was thin and flushed, and her dark hair was damp against the pillow, and her eyes, when they found me, were too bright and too large, the eyes of a child a long way inside a fever. But they found me, that is the thing. Across that dim room, out of that great sickness, her eyes found the red of the watch, and then they found the lantern in my hand, and I watched something come up in that small burning face that I will carry to my grave. Recognition. She knew me. Even there, even that far in, she knew the guard from the court, and she knew the light, and her cracked lips moved, and Bess had to lean close to hear it, and Bess straightened with tears standing in her eyes and said to the room, wondering, she says, "You came in." The guard came in. I did not know the protocol for this, because there is none, so I did the only thing I knew. I did not rush to her bedside and gush at her, which would have frightened her, because it would have been wrong. It would have been a stranger being kind and not the guard being the guard. Instead, I stopped, 3 paces inside the door, where she could see me full, and I came to attention. Heels together, chin level, the full posture of the watch, exactly as I stood it in the court, exactly as she had watched me stand it 140 nights from her high window. And I lifted the lantern slowly, deliberately, the way I lifted it across the dark court, and I raised it and lowered it and raised it. 3 times. I am here. And the Princess Malin, from her sickbed, with the last of the strength in her small, thin arm, lifted her hand off the coverlet, just her hand. She could not lift a lamp, but she did not need a lamp now, because the guard had come indoors and the language could be made of hands, and she raised it and lowered it and raised it. 3 times. I am here. I heard the Queen make a sound behind me, quickly stifled. I did not turn. This was between the guard and the child, and I would not break it for the crown itself. I held the lantern high, a long moment, the way I held it every night, and the child held her small hand up, wavering, a long moment, the 2 of us keeping the whole of our silent treaty there in the dim sick room. I am here, the promise is kept, and then when I had held it long enough that she was sure, absolutely sure, in a way no soothing lie had made her sure in 2 nights, I lowered the light slow and even. Good night, rest now, I have the watch. And her small hand came down slow to match it, and she closed her 2 bright eyes. And for the first time Bess told me after, for the first time in 2 nights, the child's rigid frightened body went loose, the fret went out of her, and she sank back into the pillows, not thrashing but resting, persuaded down out of her fear by the one fixed thing in her world, which had come back. The great physician stepped forward then, very quietly, and I braced, because a man of his stature does not suffer a courtyard guard to interfere in his sick room, and he had every right to have me thrown out. His name was Dr. Ansel Pike, and he was the most eminent physician in Eldermoor, an old man with a lined, severe face and the coldest, most careful eyes I have ever seen, and he came and stood beside me and looked down at the child now resting where she had thrashed, and then he looked at the lantern in my hand for a long, long moment, weighing it the way he would weigh a dose. And then he said, low, so as not to wake her, in the flattest, most unsentimental voice in the world, "In 40 years of medicine, guardswoman, I have learned that I can lower a fever and I cannot lower a fear, and that of the two the second kills more children. I have watched this child spend 3 nights' worth of strength she did not have on being afraid. You have just done with a lantern what my entire pharmacopoeia could not do. She is calm. Do you understand me? For the first time since it turned, she is calm, which means for the first time her strength is going where it must go, into the fight and not into the fear." He turned his cold, careful eyes on me full. "I do not pretend to understand what passed between you two just now, and I do not need to. I am a practical man and I prescribe what works. And so I am telling you, and I will tell the Queen, and I will put it in my own hand on the record if it will make it stick. That light is now part of this child's treatment as much as anything in my bag. It is to come every night without fail for as long as she is ill, whatever it costs, whatever it breaks. Is that understood?" "Yes, doctor," I whispered. And that, I see it clearly now, though I did not then, was the moment the whole thing changed its nature. Up to that moment it had been a private promise between a guard and a child, a small warm secret I could keep alone with a lantern in an empty court. From that moment it was a prescription, a duty laid on the whole watch by the crown and the highest medicine in the realm, because a single guard cannot stand every night without fail for as long as a grave illness lasts. She must sleep. She can fall ill herself. She can be rostered away or hurt or 100 things. And the one thing this light could never, ever again do was fail, because now the child was staking her rest and her calm, and the physicians were staking the fight itself, on the light coming without fail. The very thing that made it powerful, that it was certain, that 3 times means you promised, was the thing that made it terrifyingly fragile in the hands of one tired girl. I understood this standing in the sick room, and it frightened me more than the fever had. Because I had promised, and now the promise had grown to a size one person could not carry, and if it broke, if one single night I was not there, and the child surfaced out of the dark and reached for the light and it did not come, the harm would be worse than if it had never come at all. I had made the light a certainty. Now the certainty had to be kept absolutely, and I was one girl. I looked at Captain Marrow, who had come to the door, and I saw that he had understood it too, faster than I had, the way old captains understand things, and I saw the answer already forming in his gray eyes, and it was the answer that would become the act of honor the whole palace remembers. He did not say it there, over the sleeping child. But he caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, and in the gallery afterward when the door was eased shut, he said it plain, and it was the largest thing anyone had ever said to me. "One guard cannot keep a promise this size," he said, "so it will not be one guard, it will be the watch, all of us. If that child has been given a guardsman's promise, then she will be given a guardsman's promise the way this house keeps them, not by one man's strength which fails, but by the relief coming always forever, one after another, so the post is never empty though the men change. That is the whole genius of what we do, Callowmere. No single one of us can stand forever, but the watch can. The light will not come from you, it will come from the watch. And the watch does not sleep, and the watch does not fail, and the watch does not leave its post." He looked at me. "You started this alone. You will not finish it alone. Muster the company. We are going to teach 30 guardsmen how to keep a little girl's promise." I have stood in many musters since, but I have never stood in one like the muster Captain Marrow called that morning in the long guardroom of Harrowgate. He had the whole off-duty company turned out, near 30 guardsmen, hard men and a few hard women, veterans of the walls and the gates, standing in their ranks wondering why the captain had roused them at an odd hour with the grave face of a man about to announce a death. And I stood at the side, the newest and least of them, feeling every eye slide over me and wonder what the courtyard girl had to do with it. Captain Marrow did not soften it, and he did not dress it up. He told them the princess was very ill, gravely ill, and a low sound went through the ranks, because a soldier of a house loves the house's children in a fierce, wordless way, and every one of them had watched those two children go by on their way to lessons. And then he told them about the light, all of it. He told them a guard of this company had, without seeking any credit and against the letter of every order, kept a lonely child company across a dark court for 140 nights, and had built with that child a promise made of light, and that the physicians of the realm had now declared that promise to be worth more to the child's life than anything in their bags, and that the child was too ill to keep it, and one guard could not keep it alone, and so the watch would keep it. All of them together, around the clock, for as long as it took. I watched their faces while he spoke, and I will tell you the truth of what I saw because it is the heart of this whole telling. I had braced for the thing the young always brace for, the scorn of the hardened, the eye roll of the veteran at the sentimental notion of grown soldiers signaling with lanterns to a sick child. I had braced to be laughed at and my light with me, and there was not one flicker of it, not one. These were not soft men. These were men who had stood the gates in the wet cold of 30 winters, and had no patience for foolishness. And they stood there and listened to their old captain describe a language of lamplights between a guardswoman and a burning child, and I watched their hard faces, one after another, do the thing Captain Marrow's had done at the window. I watched the iron soften, and the eyes go bright, and jaws set hard against feeling, and I understood a thing about the red that I had not understood before, which is that the discipline is not the opposite of the tenderness. The discipline is what the tenderness is poured into so it does not spill and is not wasted. These men had spent their whole lives learning to stand a post without leaving, and here at last was a post worth every year of it. When Captain Marrow finished and asked which of them would take a turn at the courtyard light through the nights to come, every hand in the room went up. Every hand. He had not finished the question. Old Denby, who had 30 years and a bad hip and had earned the right to never stand a night watch again, put his hand up first and highest. A great silent guardsman named Othick, near 7 feet of him, the strongest man in the company, put up a hand the size of a spade and cleared his throat and said, in a voice like gravel, "I take every night of it myself, Captain, and thank you for the honor." And there was a low rumble of agreement, and Captain Marrow had to raise his hand to stop them from turning it into a competition. "It's a rota, not a duel," he said dryly, but his voice was not quite steady when he said it, and every man there heard that it was not and loved him for it. So we built it, and this is where I must tell you the shape of the thing, because the shape is the honor of it. It was not enough. We had learned to lift a light in the court, because the child could not come to the window, and I could not be in her room every night. Even the Queen would not ask a 19-year-old to stand a sick room around the clock, and it would have been wrong. It would have made me a nurse and not a guard, and it was the guard she needed. So Dr. Pike, cold, practical, brilliant man, solved it, and his solution turned the whole thing into something greater than any of us had imagined. "The child does not need to see the light," he said. "She needs to know it came. Those are different things, and the second is stronger because it can be built into a certainty and the first cannot." And he devised, with Bess and the Queen, a thing of such simple beauty that I have never forgotten it. Each night at the stroke of 1, the hour the child and I had always kept, a guardsman would stand the courtyard post and lift the light 3 times to the dark window, exactly as I had done for 140 nights. And Bess or the Queen or whoever kept the night watch at the bedside would be at the window to see it and would go to the child, waking her gently if she must, though usually the child had learned to wake herself near one, and would take the child's small hand and lift it 3 times and say the words that became the ritual of that sick room, the words that traveled the whole palace and are spoken in Harrowgate still. The guard is at his post. The light has come. The promise is kept. Rest now. And the child, hearing it, knowing it, would let go of the day's fear and sink into the calm the physicians needed, and spend her strength on the fight and not the fear. And so it was done, and the company kept it as I have never seen a duty kept. There was a rota drawn up, and no man ever missed his turn or came late to it, or stood it with anything less than the full reverence of a state occasion. They stood the courtyard post at the stroke of one in the full red of the watch, whatever the weather, and the weather that spring was cruel, cold rains and one night a wet spring snow, and they lifted the light to the window 3 times, slow and sure, to a child most of them had never spoken a word to, as though the realm depended on it, which, in the way that finally matters, it did. Old Denby stood his nights though his hips screamed at him. Great Othick stood his and wept without shame in the dark court, and told me after that he had a daughter that age at home in the country he had not seen in a year, and that lifting the light was the closest he could come to lifting it for her. The young ones begged for extra turns. To stand the light became the most honored watch in Harrowgate, and men who had stood at coronations counted it above them all. And I will not pretend I gave up my place in it. I stood more nights than any of them, because it had started with me, and I could not have borne to hand it wholly away, and Captain Marrow let me, only making me swear I would sleep by day and not run myself into the ground, which I swore and half kept. But the glory of it, and I knew it even then, was that it was no longer mine. It had become the watch's, and that was not a loss but the whole point. A promise one girl made had grown too large for one girl, and instead of breaking under the size of it, it had been taken up by 30 pairs of shoulders and made unbreakable, the way a single reed snaps and a bound sheaf of them will not. The child had one guard, and now she had 30, and behind the 30 the whole institution of the watch, 400 years of men who do not leave their posts, all of it bent now to the single task of lifting a light to a sick child's window so that she would not be afraid in the dark. I do not think there has been an honor guard in the history of Eldermoor to equal it, and it was mounted for an audience of one small burning girl who could not even come to the glass to see it. For 6 nights it held. 6 nights the light came without fail, and the child kept calm, and Dr. Pike's cold, careful face grew, by imperceptible degrees, less grim. And we let ourselves, all of us, begin to hope, and that, of course, is exactly when it nearly all came apart. The 7th day was the best the house had seen. The fever eased. The child sat up. She took broth and then a little bread, and she spoke clearly, and she asked, the whole palace repeated it, passing it hand to hand like a warm coal. She asked whether she might soon be well enough to come to her own window again and lift the lamp herself, and thank the guards properly, because it was not right that they should do all the lifting while she lay about in bed. She had been told, of course, about the watch. The Queen had told her, in one of the clear windows the fever allowed, that it was not one guard now but all of them, 30 guardsmen taking turns to keep her promise, and the child had gone very quiet and then had asked, in dead earnest, whether that meant she was now the guard's commanding officer since they were keeping her post, and the Queen had said yes, in a manner of speaking, she supposed it did, and the child had nodded, satisfied, and appointed herself, from her sickbed, captain of the night watch, and had asked that the guards be told they were doing very well and might carry on. When Captain Marrow was told this, he stood in the guardroom and turned his face to the window for a while and did not speak, and no one troubled him. That golden 7th day the whole house exhaled. You could feel it, the shoulders coming down, the voices rising above the whisper they had kept for a week, the first careful laughter in the kitchens. Bess slept 4 hours, the first real sleep since it turned. The Queen was seen to smile. And I let the hope all the way in. God forgive me, after a week at the edge of what I could bear I let it flood me. And I stood the courtyard light that 7th night lighter than I had stood anything in my life, and lifted it 3 times to a window where, they told me, the child had insisted on being propped up to watch it come, and had lifted her own hand back, 3 times, stronger than the night before, and had said the words along with Bess, the promises kept, and had slept smiling. I have learned since what the experienced physicians know and dread, which is that a fever of that kind is cruelest exactly here, that the body can gather its strength and spend it in a rally and then fall back worse than before, and that the seasoned doctor fears the good afternoon more than the bad night for what can follow it. Dr. Pike knew. I saw it, that golden seventh day. Though I did not understand it, I saw that while the whole house eased, Pike did not ease. He stayed close. He checked the child more often, not less. His cold, careful face, which had been growing less grim all week, went grim again, quietly, while everyone around him celebrated, and he said nothing to spoil the one good day the house had earned. But he did not leave, and he did not sleep, and he watched. It fell back on the 8th night, and it fell back hard, and it fell back at the worst possible hour and in the worst possible way, and I was in the middle of it, and I will tell it as steadily as I can. I was not on the courtyard light that 8th night. The rota had me down to sleep, and Captain Marrow had ordered me to it, because I had stood too many nights running and was gray in the face, and he was right. Great Othic had the light. But a storm came up out of the west that evening, a true spring tempest, the kind that comes down the river valley once or twice a year and strips slates off roofs. A howling black wind and rain driven flat and, worst of all, near midnight. A great tearing gust that brought down one of the ancient chestnut's heavy limbs across the courtyard, and with it, the fall of masonry from the old wall it struck, so that the courtyard post, the very stone where the guard must stand to lift the light to the window, was suddenly a place of falling stone and thrashing branch and blinding rain, impassable, dangerous, a place no officer could in conscience order a man to stand. And that same night near one, the fever took the child again. I was woken by Bess herself, shaking me, her face wild. "It's come back," she said. "It's come back worse, and there's a tree down in the court and they're saying the guard can't stand the light tonight, it's not safe. And the child, Wren, the child is asking for the light, she's frightened out of her wits and asking is the guard at his post, is the light coming, and if we tell her no, if the one night she needs it most the light doesn't come." Bess could not finish it. She did not need to. I was already up and pulling on the red. I have thought about that night more than any other in my life, and I have come to believe it was the truest test the whole thing ever faced. It had to be kept precisely because it had been made a certainty. That was the trap in the gift. We had taught the child that the light comes without fail. 3 times means you promised, and a promise that holds only in fair weather is the cruelest lie of all, because it fails you on exactly the night the dark is worst. If the light failed her on the 8th night, in the storm, when the fever came roaring back, it would not merely be a light that failed. It would be the collapse of the one certain thing in her world at the moment she was most afraid, and it would take from her, I was sure of it, the calm the physician said was the whole of her fight. I came out into the gallery and found chaos in the ordered house. The storm was screaming. Water was coming in somewhere. And in the little knot of men outside the sick room I found the crisis I had dreaded, Captain Marrow, and Dr. Pike, and great Othic soaked to the skin and stricken, and a young officer of the palace guard, sensible and correct and utterly wrong, saying the thing that reasonable men say. The courtyard is not safe. There is stone coming down off the west wall, and that limb is not the last the tree will drop in this wind. I cannot order a man to stand under it. I will not. We will explain to the child in the morning that the storm prevented it. She is a reasonable girl. She will understand a storm. And he was right. And he was decent. And he was proposing the reasonable middle course that would have broken everything. Because an 8-year-old burning with a returned fever at 1 in the morning does not understand a storm. She understands only that the promise did not come on the night she needed it, and that understanding would have gone into her like a knife. And I saw Captain Marrow's face, and I saw that the old captain who had never bent a regulation in 40 years was, for the first time in his life, at the edge of an order he did not know how to give, because the young officer was right about the danger, and right that no man could be ordered under falling stone, and yet everything the old captain was, everything the red meant, everything the weak had built, stood against letting that light fail. And into that terrible pause, before I had decided to, before I knew I would, I heard my own voice, steady in a way that astonished me, cut across the storm and the argument. Then no one need order it, sir, because I am not ordered, I am asking leave. The courtyard is the guard's post, and I am the guard, and I will stand it, and the risk is mine to take because the promise is mine to keep, and no order of yours is broken if I take it up myself. And I turned to Captain Marrow, and I said the thing that I had learned from him that first gray dawn, gave it back to him when he needed it. You told me the watch does not leave its post, storm or no storm. That's the whole of what the red means, sir. You said so. So give me leave, and I'll go and keep it, because the one thing that must not happen tonight, whatever else does, is that the child reaches for the light and it isn't there. There was a silence in the gallery under the scream of the storm, and in it Captain Marrow looked at me for a long moment, and I watched 40 years of iron regulation war in his old face with the one thing worth breaking it for, and I watched the one thing win. But he did not do what I expected. He did not give me leave to go alone. He straightened, and something came into him that I had not seen. The captain, he must have been in his prime, and he said, "No, not alone. You do not stand a dangerous post alone, while your captain sends you to it and stays dry. We stand it together, or not at all." And great Othic said, "Three, then," and old Denby, who should not have been out of bed, was already reaching for his bearskin. And within a minute it was not one girl proposing to risk herself, but the watch, the whole of it that was in the palace that night, turning out into the storm, because that is what the watch is, and I had forgotten it in my 19-year-old certainty that the burden was mine, and Captain Marrow had just reminded me, and it was the second great lesson of that spring. That a promise kept alone is a fine thing, and a promise kept by men who will not let you keep it alone is a greater one. And Dr. Pike, cold, practical Pike, did the thing that made it possible. "You cannot stand under the west wall," he said. "The officer is right about that. It will kill you, and a dead guard keeps no promises. But you do not need the old post. The child needs to see the light come, or to be told truly that it came. So stand where it is safe and where she can see it. Under the tree is death, but the north colonnade is stone-roofed and sound, and it faces her window across the court, and a light lifted there will carry. Trust the cold man to find, inside the disaster, the one narrow path through it. We would not stand the old post. We would stand a new one, safe under the sound colonnade, and lift the light from there, and it would carry across the storming court to the high window, and the promise would be kept without a man dying to keep it. Which is," Pike observed dryly as we made ready, "generally the superior way to keep a promise." So we went out into it, and I will tell you what the 8th night looked like, because I stood in the middle of it, and I have never seen anything like it since. The Chestnut Court was a place of ruin and fury. The great limb lay smashed across the cobbles where the child and I had signaled over 100 quiet nights. The rain came down not in drops but in ropes. The wind tore at the bearskins and the red wool, and tried to take the lantern's flame the instant it was lit. And under the north colonnade, on the sound stone, out of the killing reach of the wall, there formed up a thing I had never seen and will never forget. Not one guard with a light, but a rank of the watch, shoulder to shoulder in the storm, in the full red, Captain Marrow and great Othic and old Denby, and 2 more and myself, all of us soaked through and streaming and standing at perfect attention, as though it were the calmest review on the calmest morning of the year. Because if the child, propped at her window across the court, was to see the light come on the worst night of the storm, then by God she would see it come from a whole honor guard of the watch standing fast in the tempest, so that she would know, past any fear the returned fever could put in her, that nothing in this world, no storm, no falling stone, no dark, was going to keep the guard from her post. And we lit the lantern. It took 3 tries in that wind, and Othic sheltered it with his great body until it caught. And I stepped forward from the rank because it was mine to lift, and they gave it to me without a word, and I raised the light high into the driving rain so it would carry across the black court to the high window where a small frightened shape had been propped to watch for it, and I lowered it and raised it. 3 times, slow, sure, the promise kept in the teeth of the storm, I am here. And across the court in the high window, dim behind the streaming glass, a small light answered. Not lifted 3 times, she was too weak that night for that, but held up, wavering at the glass, where Bess had lifted it and was holding the child's hand around it so that the child could feel that she had answered even if she could not do it herself. Held up and held there, a long trembling moment, across the whole ruin of the storm, the child's light and the guard's light, meeting over the wrecked court exactly as they had met on the calm first night, the promise unbroken, the language still whole. The dark between us crossed one more time when it was hardest of all to cross it. And I held mine high and did not lower it, and the rain ran down my face and mixed with what was not rain, and the whole rank of the watch stood fast behind me in the storm. And across the court, the child's small light burned steady in a nurse's steadying hand. And for one long moment on the worst night of that spring, there was nothing in all the Kingdom of Eldermoor but 2 small flames refusing together to go out. I do not know how long we stood, long past the 3 lifts. We stood, I think, until we were sure, until the child's light finally lowered, slow and even, and we knew she had been laid back down, and we lowered ours to answer it, "Good night, rest now, we have the watch." And then we stood a while longer, because none of us could bear to leave the court while the storm still raged over the window we were watching, and Captain Marrow did not order us in, and so the watch of Harrowgate stood a rank in the tempest under the colonnade half the night, guarding a light in a window, until the wind at last began to fall. And within the room, across that court, through those hours, the true battle was being fought, and I was not in it, and am glad I was not, and will not invent it. I know only what Bess and Dr. Pike told me after, that the returned fever climbed that night higher than it had climbed before, to the very edge of the thing I have promised not to name. That Dr. Pike and Bess and the Queen fought it hour by hour with everything the art possessed and everything a mother's arms possessed, which at the last are the 2 great medicines, and there are no others. And that the child, through the worst of it in the grip of the fever, kept turning her hot face toward the window, toward the storm, toward the light, and that each time the light came, each time Bess could say to her the words, "The guard is at his post. The light has come. The promise is kept. Rest now." The child would loosen, the terror would go out of her, and she would sink back and rest and spend her strength, as Pike had said from the first, on the fight and not the fear. She had no strength to spare that night, Pike told me after, in his flat, cold voice that I had learned by then to hear the depth beneath. None. The fever took everything she had, and I will tell you as a man of medicine, guardswoman, that I do not believe she would have kept the little she needed to come through if she had spent it being afraid. She did not spend it being afraid. Because every hour, in the worst of it, she was told the guard had not left, and she believed it, because it was true, because you had not left. I cannot measure that on any instrument I own. But I have signed a great many certificates in 40 years, and I know the difference between a child who fights and a child who gives up, and I know what turned her from the one to the other, and it was not in my bag. The fever broke an hour before dawn. It broke the way they say those fevers break, all at once, near the lowest ebb of the night, when the storm outside had blown itself out to a thin, cold rain, and the wind had dropped and the chestnut court lay quiet and wrecked under a sky going gray. The child's raging heat sank. The sweat came, the good sweat the physicians pray for, and she passed, out of the terrible bright country of the fever, down into a deep and ordinary sleep, her breathing gone slow and easy, her small hot hand cooling in her mother's, the fight won in the darkest hour by a body that had kept just enough strength to win it because it had not, on any single night, been left to fight alone in the dark. We did not know, out in the court. We stood the last of our watch under the colonnade in the thinning rain, and we did not know whether we had lifted our light over a room where a child was winning or a room where a child was slipping away, And that not knowing is the hardest thing a guard carries. To stand your post through the crisis and be, of all the house, the last to learn how it ended, because you cannot leave the post to go and ask. We only stood. And near dawn the storm was spent and the court lay quiet, and the gray light came up over the wrecked chestnut and the fallen limb and the ruined cobbles, and we stood our rank in the ruin, soaked and cold and past exhaustion, and we waited to be told. And it was to us that Captain Marrow assigned the bringing of the news, and I have understood since that he did it on purpose, that it was the last and best thing he taught me that spring. Because when the door of the West Range opened at last in the gray dawn, and Bess came out onto the little balcony above the court, worn to a shadow but with her face lit like a window at last thrown open, it was to the rank of guards standing in the ruined court that she called it down, and it was right that it come to us. Because we had earned the hearing of it in the storm. She leaned on the rail and she called down through the thin rain in a voice that broke on every word and did not care. It's broke. The fever's broke. An hour before dawn it broke and it's not come back. She's sleeping, real sleeping, cool as you like, and Dr. Pike says, he says she's turned the corner. He says the danger's past. He says she's going to be well. I will not try to describe the sound the watch made in that court. I did not know soldiers could make such a sound. It was not a cheer quite. It was rougher and older than a cheer, wrenched up out of hard men who had stood a storm all night not knowing, and it went up into the gray dawn over the wrecked chestnut and rang off the old walls, and great Othick put his enormous face in his enormous hands and wept like a boy, and old Denby sat straight down on the wet cobbles because his legs would not hold him, and Captain Marrow stood at attention, and let the tears run down his old stone face without moving. The way I had seen him do nothing else in all my months, and after a moment he said, not loud, to the court, to the tree, to all of us, well, the post held 3 words. And they were the highest words in his language, and every guard there knew it, and we straightened under them as under an accolade. I want to tell you the rest carefully, because the breaking of the fever was the turn, but it was not the end, and the true end, the news the guard finally brought, that the whole palace remembers, came a little after, and it was larger than any of us out in the court that dawn had guessed. They let the child sleep the whole day. She woke in the evening, clear-eyed and weak and hungry and cross about being weak, which Bess said was the surest sign of health there is, and she took broth and then more, and by the 2nd day she was sitting up and asking questions, and by the 3rd she had heard the whole story of the storm, how the tree had come down and the wall had shed its stone and the guards had stood a rank in the tempest under the colonnade to keep her light, and she had gone very still, and then she had asked to see them, all of them, the whole company that had kept her promise. And when she was told that could not be arranged just yet, that she must rest, she had set her small jaw in a way the whole palace was learning to respect, and she had said that in that case she would send them a message, and she had asked Bess for paper. What she wrote, or rather what she dictated to Bess in her still weak hand, is the thing the guard finally brought us, and it is kept now in the guardroom of Harrowgate under glass, and it will be kept there when everyone in this telling is dust, and I have read it 10,000 times, and I will set it down here exactly. It was Captain Marrow who brought it. He had us mustered, the whole company, on the 3rd evening in the long guardroom, and he came in with a folded paper in his hand and an expression I could not read, and he stood before us and he said, "The captain of the night watch has issued an order." And there was a ripple, because we all knew by now who the child had appointed captain of the night watch. And Captain Marrow unfolded the paper and cleared his throat, which the old man rarely needed to do, and he read it out, and this is what it said. "To the watch of Harrowgate from Malin, who you kept. I have been very ill, and I am getting better, and Dr. Pike says it is because I was not afraid, and I was not afraid because every night the light came, even in the storm, even when a tree fell down. The light came and someone told me the guard is at his post and the promise is kept. I want to tell you what I understand now that I did not understand before. I used to think the light was to keep me company because I was lonely, and it was, but now I know it was more than that. I know now that the light was a promise, and a promise is not a promise if it only comes when it is easy. It is only a promise if it comes when it is hard. And you brought it when it was hard. You brought it in the storm. You stood in the rain when a tree had fallen so that I would not be afraid. And so I am writing to tell you that I know what you did, and that I will remember it my whole life, and that when I am grown and I am queen, for I will be queen someday, my mother says, a long time from now, I am going to make it a law that the Watch of Harrowgate are the finest and truest people in the whole Kingdom of Eldermoor, because they keep their promises when it is hard, and that is the only kind of promise there is. Thank you for keeping mine. You may carry on. Malin, Captain of the Night Watch. There was not a sound in the guardroom when Captain Marrow finished. 30 guardsmen who had stood coronations and state funerals, and the gates against armed men, standing in absolute silence with the water running down their faces, undone completely by a note dictated by an 8-year-old from her sickbed. And Captain Marrow folded the paper with great care, as a man folds a thing he means to keep forever, and he said, in a voice I had never heard him use, thick and low, "In 40 years I have been given the thanks of 2 kings and a queen and a foreign prince, and I have kept none of them. This I am going to have set under glass, and it is going to hang in this room, so that every guard who comes after us, 100 years from now, when we are all forgotten, will read it, and will know what the red is for." And he did, and it hangs there yet, and the young ones read it, and it is the first thing they are shown when they take the oath, before the standing orders, before anything. This is what you are for. She came back to her window 3 weeks later. They were slow weeks, the strength coming into her by inches the way it does into the young after a hard fever. A little more color each morning, the first day sitting up, the first day out of bed, the first day carried to the window over her protests that she could walk perfectly well, thank you. And all through those weeks the light still came. We never let it lapse, not one night, though the danger was long past, because the child asked for it still, at first from need and then from love, and because the company would sooner have given up their pay than give up the light now, and because Captain Marrow had ruled, in the one sentimental order of his 40 years, that the courtyard light at the stroke of 1 was now a standing custom of the Watch of Harrowgate for as long as the present princess lived under its roof. And might God have mercy on any guard who let it fail. So it came every night, and the gardeners had cleared the fallen limb and mended the cobbles, and the old chestnut, which had lost a great branch in the storm, put out its new leaves all the same around the wound, the way the living do. The night she came back to the window, I had the courtyard light. Captain Marrow had arranged that, and I understood it for the kindness it was, and I have loved him for it ever since. It was a clear, soft night, the first true warm night of that spring, and the chestnut was in full new leaf, and I stood the old post, the mended post, on the mended cobbles at the stroke of 1, and I lifted the lantern to the high west window 3 times, slow and sure, as I had lifted it 200 nights and more, I am here. And the window lit. A small warm light, a candle held close to the glass, held by small steady hands at a child's own height, where it had not been in 9 weeks, and behind it, upright on her own 2 feet, a small watchful particular shape that I would have known across 100 courts. And the light lifted, and lowered, and lifted, 3 times, slow, sure, strong, I am here. I am not ashamed to tell you that I wept, standing at attention in the warm, dark court, weeping without moving a muscle, the way I had learned to from watching Captain Marrow, the stillness perfect and the water running down it all the same. And I lifted my light and held it high, a long, long moment, longer than I had ever held it, and across the court she held hers high to match me, the child come back to her window, the promise kept from both ends at last, the 2 small flames burning steady over the quiet mended court with the new leaves whispering between them. And then, slow and even, she lowered her light, "Good night." And I lowered mine to answer, "Good night, rest now, I have the watch." And she went from the window, on her own feet, well, and the window's ordinary dark closed over the place where her light had been, and I stood the rest of that watch with a fullness in my chest that I have never had words for and have stopped trying to find them. The Queen sent for me the next morning. I will not make a long thing of it, because the largest honors are the quietest, and hers was very quiet. She did not give me a medal. She said, as her daughter had said of the watch, that a promise kept in the dark for its own sake is not a thing a medal can reach, only insult. She thanked me, the good Queen of Eldermoor, thanking a courtyard guard, both of us standing in a plain morning room with the honesty of people who have been to the bottom of fear together, and then she said the thing I have kept. She said, "When my daughter was dying, you gave her the one thing the physicians and the crown and her own mother could not give her, which was the certainty that she was not alone in the dark. So I will tell you the truth, which is a greater thing than any reward. You saved her. The medicine did its part, and I honor it, but the fight was hers, and she could only make the fight because she was not afraid, and she was not afraid because the light came. You kept my child from being afraid on the nights she might have died of the fear. There is no honor in my gift equal to that. So carry on, guardswoman, and know that as long as there is a Harrowgate, the house will remember that a Queen of Eldermoor once owed her daughter's life to a girl with a lantern who would not let a promise go dark. The Princess Malin is well now and grown taller, but she still lights her lamp in the high west window some nights when she thinks the house is asleep, and lifts it 3 times to whichever guard has the court, and the guard lifts the light 3 times back, because the custom holds and always will. And I am not the newest guard anymore. There are 3 seasons of new ones below me now, and I am the one who teaches them the courtyard post, and the first thing I teach them is not a standing order. The first thing I teach them is the light. I take them out on their first night, and I show them the high west window and tell them what 3 lifts mean, and then I tell them the only thing I truly know, the thing a storm and a sick child and an old captain taught me in one hard spring, that anyone can keep a promise when it is easy, and that the red they wear means only one thing in the end, which is that they are the people who keep it when it is hard. When the storm comes, when the tree falls, when the light is hardest to lift and needed most. That is the post, and the guard does not leave it. The lamp still lights in the west window, the light still crosses the court. And I am still here, where I will stand until they relieve me, keeping the promise 3 times slow and sure into the dark, because 3 times means you promised, and a princess of Eldermoor taught me that from a window on the loneliest post in the palace, before either of us knew what it would come to mean. I am here, rest now, I have the watch.